The Galactic War has been going on for a long time, ever so involving more factions to take part in it. But the conflict was not only fought on the battlefield, but in the halls of Parliament, various government bodies, and the Jedi Temple was no exception. Though these halls might seem peaceful to some, in reality, they were the playing field of a multitude of strategists who all wanted it to be their turn to move their piece on the board. After the disaster of the Kashyyyk invasion, the overall war campaigns of the Galactic Republic had been performed on a lower scale, but because of that, were more successful compared to the all-out blitz that was done before. Yet some of the Jedi felt that this current pace was too slow and that victories did not mean anything, since the Imperial forces and Separatists were claiming more territory elsewhere at the same time. Or worse, pirate clans or cartels swept in to take and claim the leftovers. Multiple generals had been summoned to the temple, expecting to be sent away on new missions. Obi-Wan Kenobi was one such Jedi, and he thought he might be reunited with his master after the short but successful war campaign on Utapau. Higher-ranking leaders like Master Yoda and Mace Windu were debating on what to do next. They knew all too well that people whispered in these halls, and that there were plenty of Jedi that did not see eye to eye with them. There were multiple issues at hand, both short-term and long-term. On the short-term spectrum, there was the recently gathered intel that the Separatists would launch a full-blown assault on a rebel base, and the Rebel Alliance had requested reinforcements. Master Yoda had agreed to this request, but was afraid they would not arrive in time to help with the defense. The rebel faction had suffered a recent loss on Endor and had lost territory after being lured into a trap by the Empire. The loss signaled an opportunity for the CIS. Another problem at hand was the recent rumors going on in the underworld of Coruscant. Gossip of the sight of members from the Zan Consortium grew ever more with the disappearance of Coruscant police officers and detectives. A few weeks had passed since these rumors had started, but nothing major had happened, except the increasing number of disappearing members of the police force. There was also the issue of choosing their next war campaign, but for now, the defeat of Kashyyyk lingered in many people's hearts. The Kashyyyk campaign had come to be known as the Blood Campaign, or Ghost Campaign amongst many clones, due to the bloodshed that was done by Grand Admiral Thrawn. There were those who screamed for another invasion of Kashyyyk to wash away the defeat and shame, but there were plenty who did not agree with that either. They were afraid that history would repeat itself, and that more clone blood would be on their hands. Regardless, the Jedi higher-ups did realize that the defeat of the Kashyyyk campaign wore down heavy on people, and that at least some good news would need to come from this planet once more. A crashed Republic ship had been pinpointed on Kashyyyk that was still intact enough to where it could send out a distress signal. This would likely mean that Imperials picked up on this signal as well and went in to strip the crash site from any Republic intel they could find. But by doing so, they now created a hotspot where the Republic could sweep in and hopefully collect Imperial intel of their own from any devices planted near the crash site by the Imperials. The Jedi higher-ups hoped that the intel might have Imperial locations that could be useful in determining a future invasion if one were to arise. Since the crash site was probably not heavily guarded, a smaller force of clones could be used to get in and retrieve the data. Clone commandos would be sent out in the field to retrieve it, and they would be escorted by several shadow clone troopers. Their mission was to keep the commandos safe all the way through. Besides the clone backup, Wookie Resistance fighters would also lend a hand, since they continued their fight against the Imperial invaders even after the clones had left. They were happy to see that the Galactic Republic had not forgotten about them. Time was of the essence. Though not a lot of resistance was expected, the stormtroopers that were at the crash site would surely call in for reinforcements, and the clones had to be extracted before that would arrive. They would have to fight through the swamp where the Empire had set up multiple troopers. And thus the battle went underway. The Shadowtroopers went first, many wailing through the muddy waters as blaster fire lit up the darkened area. Shrieks of the Wookiees could be heard as their force advanced. The fact that many of their troops were half submerged in water made them smaller targets, but also a lot slower. It was not uncommon for a trooper to get stuck or strangled up by the vegetation below. Immediately on the first clash, a lot of stormtroopers lost their lives. Their white armor made them easy targets. It showed how the Empire did not expect any small force to be dropped on Kashyyyk after the initial victory, at least not on this spot. But the fighting in the watery and muddy swamp did slow the clones down, giving the stormtroopers the chance to have more of their men approach the battlefield. This roamed through the heads of some of the clone officers, who also knew that most likely the call for reinforcements had already been given. The green fog and fumes that hovered above the water worked as some sort of cover for the clones. Most of them had left the shallow waters and made their approach on either side of the creek. Their darker colors made them more difficult to hit for some of the stormtroopers. A few of these stormtroopers were rookies. They were rolled in after the initial Kashyyyk campaign, and for those troopers this was their first combat experience. The more experienced stormtroopers were the ones that often would stand tall during the fight, sometimes resulting in them getting shot first. As the enemy was hunkered down, the clones moved forward. With the green fog everywhere, it was sometimes difficult to see where one could place one's feet. If a bunch of clones would trip, it would mean they would be an easy target for sure. Those out of the water actually utilized the fog in their favor by going prone. The light casted by blaster fire revealed where they had to crawl, while the enemy could not see their approach. It was a fight that was but a fraction of the infamous beach landing during the Kashyyyk campaign. Yet for many of the clones and stormtroopers alike, this battle was just about as intense. The battle went on, as the green swamp water slowly turned red with the blood of the dead from both sides. Bodies floating in the water were used as cover desperately, and some even pretended to be dead out of sheer fear. But the calculated strike of this particular crashed Republic ship was the right choice for the clones, as they all saw that they would be victorious in the first clash. The real question was if they would be able to retrieve any valuable and usable data before reinforcements would arrive. Then at the other side of the galaxy, the time came for the rebels to prove their worth. Alarms were going off throughout the base as the droids had been sighted in the distance. The howling noise of the engines of their machines crept ever closer. But it wasn't like the rebels had nothing. They had powerful turrets stationed all across the shoreline. They were battle-hardened, and had anticipated a day like this would come someday. But would it be enough to stop the onslaught of the Separatist droid army?